with that dramatic music, thank you all for being here. Let me just begin with a few housekeeping matters to get it out of the way. In addition to the people who are going to watch this here, we have millions who are going to watch it because the cameras are in here. We're taping this for my Sunday show on CNN. So I have a couple of requests. Can you really turn your cell phone ringers off? I know it is at this point a pointless task to ask people to turn their cell phones off, but please make sure that they don't make any noise. Could you also not make any noise until we get to the point in the program where we will open it up and have a conversation. But for as much as possible, if you could just help us along these lines. With that, it is a huge, huge honor and pleasure to welcome Jane Goodall to Davos, to the stage, to my show. People say that Henry Kissinger once said, "Those who need no introduction usually crave one the most." No. I don't think this is true of Jane Goodall. She needs no introduction, and she is Jane Goodall. There are very few people about whom one can say that, so we're just going to plunge right into it. You started out not realizing this was going to be your destiny at all, right? How old were you when you went to Africa for the first time?
Well, I was 10 years old when I met Tarzan of the Apes in a little book and fell in love with him, and we married the wrong Jane. And so it was 10 years old when I had a dream. I will grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals and write books about them. And everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? We didn't have any money. World War II was raging. Africa was far away. And I was just a girl. Jane, dream about something you can achieve. But my mother, my amazing mother, said, if you really want something, you're going to have to work extremely hard, take advantage of all opportunity, but don't give up. And I've taken that message to young people, particularly in deprived communities. And I wish Mum was alive to know how many people have come up to me and said, Jane, thank you. You've taught me that because you did it, I can do it too. So anyway, the opportunity came when I had a boring job in London. I was invited to Kenya. I was 23, which is about like a 17-year-old today. We were very naive after the war. And I was invited to stay with a friend, and I met the famous Leakey, and he's the one who gave me the opportunity to go and live, not with any animal, but the one most like us, the chimpanzee.
So when you met Leakey and you decided to do this, you didn't have any particular scientific training.
None at all.
You were just fascinated by this.
Yes, and you know, I left school and I had all the brains to go to university, but we didn't have the money. And there were no scholarships in those days unless you were good in foreign languages, which I wasn't. So I just had to do a boring secretarial and get a secretarial job. But you know what? When I met Leakey, 2 days before I met him, he'd lost his secretary. He needed a secretary. There I was. And so I was in this world, head of the Natural History Museum in Nairobi. So I was surrounded by people who could tell me about all these things about the animals, the mammals, the birds, the reptiles, the insects. And it was like being in heaven. And I think he was impressed by how much I knew because I'd read book after book, anything I could. So he gave me this amazing opportunity.
And was the opportunity designed from the start that you would live with chimpanzee? How did that part happen?
Well, I always, you know, I'd watched animals all my life, and I knew there was nobody out there doing anything. So what I knew was I've got to get the chimpanzees to trust me so that I can learn about them. But the big problem was there was only money for 6 months. And the chimps were very shy, and they took one look at this weird white ape and ran away. And, you know, as weeks became months, I became increasingly nervous because I knew if I didn't see something exciting, that would be the end, and I'd have let Leakey down and be the end of my dream. But through my binoculars, I was beginning to learn about aspects of their behavior. And one chimpanzee, darling David Greybeard, he had a beautiful white beard. I don't know why David, but David Greybeard. And he's the one I saw using and making tools to fish for termites. And it was that enabled Leakey to go to National Geographic Society. Not only did they agree to continue to fund the research, but they sent out a filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, who became my husband, and it was his early footage that took the story of Jane and the chimps around the world.
And why was that so important? It was that you were suddenly seeing the connection between the chimps and humans, because if they were able to make tools, they had some kind of intelligence.
Well, the point was that science back then believed that humans and only humans used and made tools. So I was showing that that wasn't true. And Leakey eventually told me I had to get a degree. And he said, I've got you a place in Cambridge University in England to do a PhD. There's no time for you to do a preliminary degree. So I was very scared when I got to Cambridge. You know, these erudite professors. Can you imagine how I felt when many of them said, Jane, you've done your study completely wrong. You shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. That's not scientific. You should have given them numbers. You cannot talk about them having personalities. You cannot talk about them having minds capable of solving problems. And you certainly can't talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, despair. But fortunately, when I was a child, I had a wonderful teacher who taught me that at least in this respect, these professors were totally wrong. That teacher was my dog. Rusty, you can't share your life with a dog, a cat, a horse, a bird, I don't care what, and not know that the professors were wrong. And we are not the only being on the planet who have personalities, minds, and emotions.
What did it take, when you think about it, to get those chimps to trust you? Because I mean, this is something that translates well beyond, simply about chimps. It's how do we as human beings make others trust us, and how do we trust other humans?
Well, I think the important thing for me was not to push too fast. I wore the same colored clothes every day, so there was nothing new. And patience. Patience. When you study animals, you simply must have patience. And I was, I guess, born with patience. I was born loving animals.
And did you feel as though there was a point at which something changed? Was there a moment, or was it just a slow, incremental extending of their trust to you?
Well, it was both in a way. I mean, basically it was the slow, gradually David Graybeard accepted me, and then I'd come up to a group in the forest with David, part of it, and instead of running, they kind of looked at him sitting calmly, and I suppose they thought, well, she can't be so scary after all. But then there was one moment for me that was a very seminal moment. I was actually following David through the forest, and I thought I'd lost him. And I came through this tangle of vegetation, and he was sitting, he was looking back, and it looked as though he was waiting for me. I don't know, maybe he was. So I sat down near him, and there was a ripe red whale palm nut, which chimps love. So I held it out to him on my palm, and he turned his face away. So I put my hand closer, and he turned, he looked directly in my eyes. He reached out, he took the nut and dropped it. Must have been something wrong, I don't know. But very gently squeezed my fingers. And that's how chimpanzees reassure each other. So in that moment, we communicated with each other perfectly in a gestural communication system that must have predated human words. And I think that was the moment when I thought, this is what I have to do. I just have to carry on. And now, of course, that's turned into protection of the species, which in many places has become extinct because of us.
Let's stay for a moment with the story, this amazing story of you living with the chimpanzees. That video footage, we now have lots of video footage. We have the movie.
Jane.
The thing that I was most struck by was, in the first phase, your experience with the chimpanzees is, very benign, and then you see what happens when another tribe, as it were, comes in, and this savage war that takes place between the two groups. What did you learn from that?
Well, it was a big shock. You know, I'd already learned how like us they are in so many ways, like kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, begging for food, the close bonds between mothers and family members, the competition between males for top rank, a lot of swaggering and posturing, reminding me a lot of some male politicians today, no names. And but I thought they were like us but nicer. And then came this war that you mentioned. And it was really shocking. It was particularly bad because the main community I'd been studying was very big. I think because there were too many males, they split. And so when the larger group invaded the southern portion of the territory where the smaller group had made its own range, it was a civil war. They were killing individuals they had groomed with, played with, fed with. So just like a civil war. And it took me a long time to make terms with it. But just as we too have this brutal side, we have a compassionate, loving, altruistic side, and so do they. So you can have a little infant who's lost his mother, and if he's not adopted, he will die. Usually it's an older brother or sister. But if there's no older brother or sister, then an unrelated adult may care for that, even a big male. And it's amazing. The altruistic was once you take on an infant who's riding on your back and you have to share the nest with him, you lose out in the fight for dominance if you're a male.
And when you look at the way in which human beings go to war now, you know, exactly as you said, they will sometimes go to war and kill the people they live with, their next door neighbors, their relatives. Do you think that all of that is at some level very primal, and that that this is a reflection of our ape-like tendencies?
Well, unfortunately, the reason Leakey wanted me to study chimps in the first place, he spent his life searching for the fossilized remains of early humans. So he thought, if Jane sees behavior that's similar or the same in chimpanzees today and humans today, maybe that behavior was in a common ape-like, human-like ancestor about 6 million years ago. And if so, then these behaviors have come with humans and chimpanzees on our long, separate evolutionary pathways. He felt this would help him have a better feeling for how early humans might have behaved. So that's why he sent me. Right. So do we have some kind of instinctive, aggressive tendencies? You can't look around the world and say no. We do. But we have, the biggest difference, we've developed this intellect, an explosive development of the intellect. Think what we can do. And so we actually are capable of monitoring our own behavior. And if you look around at the ordinary general population, you may hear, oh, I could kill him. But we don't mean it. And the trouble is that war today is not the kind of simple territorial behavior that it was with our early ancestors or some of the indigenous people. It's all to do with economic development and money and oil and things like that. So it's completely different in a way.
The big difference you note is language. Human beings have a developed, sophisticated language. What does that mean? What does that give us that apes don't have?
Well, it's interesting that chimpanzees and some other animals can be taught a human language, but they haven't developed it. Right. So the advantage it gives us, we can teach our children about things that are not present. We can give stories from the past. We should be able to learn from the past, but we're not very good at it. We can make plans for the future. You and I could say, okay, we'll get together for another show in 5 years' time. But most important, we can bring people from different backgrounds to discuss a problem and try and find a solution. So I believe it's language that triggered this explosive development of the intellect, which is the main difference between us chimpanzees and other animals.
but you note that there are some things that seem remarkably similar, particularly among men. The swagger, the search for status, the showing off, the trying to impress the female of the species, all that seems remarkably similar.
And dominate the female of the species. Luckily, the female human is rising up beyond that.
Because of the intellect, perhaps.
Because you know, there's another kind of evolution going on. There's the physical evolution, and then there's the intellectual evolution, but there's also a moral evolution. And so we're getting together around the world and beginning to think about justice. And I think that's very important. Is it just to have a woman subjugated, just to bear children and cook for her husband? It's not just. And women have been treated in many countries for many years, you know, that they don't have the intellect capable of doing things like men. And anyway, they shouldn't be doing it because men do it better. Now we know that's not true. Now we know that women can shine in science, in academic fields, in literature, and in politics too. So it's taking too long in some countries, but it is a gradual moral evolution.
You do believe, though, that apes have personality.
Oh, yes.
And
but so does your dog and your cat.
And but the moment that I think this is brought home again to me on film is in 2002. You release a chimp.
Wunda.
Tell that story.
Well, it really needs the video to go with it, but we have a sanctuary because mother chimpanzees are shot, sometimes for bush meat, well, adult males as well, but also mothers are shot to steal their babies to sell for entertainment. And it's illegal because chimps are endangered species. But if the government confiscates an orphan, what do you do with it? You can't put it back in the forest, the mother's gone. So we have sanctuaries and try and give them as good a life as we can. And this one female, Wunda, she came in as a baby. She nearly died. Her life was saved by a wonderful veterinarian, Rebecca. This is in the Republic of Congo. And gradually from this sanctuary where chimps are in groups being looked after, we're moving them onto these beautiful big islands in the river. And Wunda was scheduled to be the 15th chimpanzee to be released on Chinzula Island. Now, I'd never met her until this day, because I can't visit everywhere all the time. And I was with her on the boat, and I thought she must be feeling nervous. Her people are with her, but so I was talking to her. So when we opened the cage, she came out, she went to Rebecca, and Rebecca patted her. Then she climbed onto the cage, and she looked around, and if you're me, she's looking around in the forest, and she does a double take. She comes over, and she gives me this incredible embrace. I mean, normally an embrace is quick, and it's triggered by an excitement, but this was very deliberate, and she's holding on to me as she looks into the forest, and it was the most moving thing that's ever happened to me. Everybody cries. We were all crying.
And do you think it really meant that? Did she understand what was happening? How do you interpret that?
I don't know. One of the caregivers, Congolese, he said, how does she know that this lady is responsible for all of this? Well, of course she didn't. But
there was some instinct.
Well, I think, you know, I told you I've always loved animals, and I think there is a connection that I have with them, and that connection somehow got through to her, and so I was the one she came to for reassurance.
Wow. So now you have broadened your scope, as it were, because you've looked at these animals, but then the world they live in, the habitat, and it's led you down this path of conservation. Is that partly because you have watched so many of these forests and lands disappearing?
Well, partly that, but it all began in 1986. We brought together, by that time there were about 7 different chimp conservation, chimp research sites. And we brought the people together mainly to learn about, how do chimps behave differently in different areas? Is there cultural transmission, which there is, by the way? Is it just the environment? And we also had a session on conservation. And it was a complete shock, I think, to all of us. Everywhere where chimps were being studied, forests were going, chimpanzee numbers were dropping, the beginning of the bushmeat trade, the commercial hunting of wild animals for food, chimps caught in snares, and the live animal trade shooting mothers to sell their babies. And I left, I went to that conference. By then I had my PhD, had a research station, the best days of my life. I could be out in the rainforest, which for me is a very spiritual habitat, and you see the interconnection of all living things. And it was the best days of my life. But after that conference, although I went as a scientist with this beautiful future, I left as an activist. I knew I had to do something, but what? So I managed to get together a bit of money to go to, I think it was 6 different range countries. And I learned a lot about what was happening to the chimps. But at the same time, I learned about the problems faced by so many of the African people living in and around forest habitat. And it came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, where I'd done this. Well, we still have research going on. When I began in 1960, it was part of what we called the equatorial forest belt, stretching from the west part of East Africa right across to West Africa. When I flew over in 1990, it was a tiny 35 square kilometer island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. It's very hilly along the edge of Lake Tanganyika. There were more people living there than the land could support. Population growth was such that there was nowhere for them to go. They were too poor to buy food from elsewhere. The farmland was overused and infertile. Desperate to grow more food, they cut down the trees even on the steep slopes, so there was terrible erosion, streams getting silted up. And this is when it hit me. If we don't do something to help these people, we can't even try to save the chimpanzees or the forests. And so the Jane Goodall Institute launched a program, Take Care Otakari, and we targeted the 12 villages directly around Gombe National Park. We didn't go in as a bunch of arrogant white people. This is what we're going to do and your lives will get better. We chose a team of local Tanzanians who went into the villages and listened to the people and asked them, what do you think we could do to help you most? Which is where we began. And then this developed into a very holistic program, a main intervention being microcredit based on Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank, but also scholarships to keep girls in school beyond puberty, with the idea that the big problem here is overpopulation, and everywhere around the world, as women's education improves, family size tends to drop. So we provide also family planning information and help people find sustainable livelihoods that don't destroy the environment. And ending up with, and I love this, each village is required to make a land use management plan, but it costs money, and basically they don't do it. So we provided the money. And when we began, they would draw a map of their village and the land in sand. But our wonderful technologist, who's cutting edge, he produced high-resolution satellite imagery, and the women gathered round, and one woman said, that's where I put my baby, under that tree when I'm harvesting. So now they have made land use management plans which include laying aside areas to protect the forest. And they're learning that protecting the forest is not just for wildlife, it's for their own future, their survival. And so today, if you fly over Gombe, there are no bare hills. The trees have come back. We've planted some saplings, but basically it hadn't gone too far so that the soil still nurtured seeds with this magic they have of coming to life even after 5-10 years. And so the slopes once again, and now we're working in 72 villages throughout all chimpanzee habitat in Tanzania. And each of these villages provide volunteers who've learned to use smartphones, even if they can't read and write. And they go into, they're very proud, the village forest reserves are where most of the chimpanzees are not protected at all. And they go in with their smartphones and they record an illegally cut tree, an animal trap, sighting of a chimp, a leopard. And all of that gets uploaded onto a platform in the clouds, Global Forest Watch. So we're introducing the most modern technology to people living in very rural circumstances. And together, now they've become our partners. So this program is now in 7 other African countries.
Wow. Do you think African governments have gotten better at understanding these issues over the last 20, 25 years that you've been working on it? In other words, do we have reason to be optimistic about?
Well, let me say that I think in general, everywhere there's more awareness of what we're doing to the forests, to the oceans, to, to the farmland with agricultural farming. We know about climate change. I mean, I've witnessed it. I've stood in Greenland and watched the ice melting, even in late winter when it used not to melt in the summer. And I've seen islands where the people have had to leave because at high tide, the level of the ocean is so high because of melting ice and warming waters. And so, people are aware. And in Africa, it's the same, but presidents change. Governments change. I mean, okay, a few years ago, we could say the United States was doing pretty well. You couldn't say that today. When you have a president who denies climate change, when the evidence is all there, when you have a president who says, I refuse to believe the evidence of my own scientists. And this, of course, happens in Africa too, because people are people. And this is the major problem. We have to fight corruption. That local people get it. They're our partners. They support us. But when you get a head of government in an African country selling off his natural resources, e.g. to China, in return for building dams and building roads, which also destroy the environment if they're done in the wrong way, in the wrong place. And this is happening all over the world. So, my good friend Jeff Horowitz, who's somewhere down here, but I can't actually see anybody, he just made a couple of films about the fact that if we could save and restore tropical forests, that would be 1/3 of the solution to climate change because of the carbon dioxide they absorb that's also stored in the forest soils. And as we burn them and cut them, and the palm oil industry and logging companies and human population growth and cattle moving into the forest, it's happening all over the world. And so it's a desperately important thing that we try to save, particularly our tropical forests, but all forests. The boreal forests across the northern part of America and so forth, that also sequesters a lot of CO2, and that's going as well.
Do you think human beings have lost something in the degree to which they are unconnected, we are unconnected with nature and with the animal world in general? I mean, you talked about being in a rainforest and it being a spiritual experience. What are we losing?
We're losing an awful lot, and unfortunately, technology is partly responsible. I mean, go and look at a group of kids on a bus, and maybe they're going through beautiful scenery. What are they doing? Like this. They're looking at virtual reality and ignoring the reality. Now, there have been quite a lot of scientific experiments done that show that being out in nature, having greenness, is good for psychological development of a child. And that's what we're losing. There are so many children who either cannot get into nature or who are not interested in getting into nature. And so what are we doing to the psychology of the future? So we have a program now, JGI, Roots and Shoots, which began again in Tanzania with 12 high school students in 1991. And it's now in nearly 80 countries. We have members from kindergarten, university, everything in between. And basically, it started because as I was traveling around, I was meeting so many young people who didn't seem to have hope. And mostly they were just apathetic, didn't seem to care. But some were very depressed and some were very angry. And I began talking to them. And they basically said the same thing. You've compromised our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. So this saying, we haven't inherited the planet from our parents, we've borrowed it from our children, but we haven't, have we? We've stolen. Aren't we still stealing the future of our children as we go on destroying the environment? We depend on the environment. But when they said there's nothing we can do about it, I thought, no, we've got a window of time. If we get together, we have time to start healing the harm that we've inflicted. So the main message is every single individual, that's you and me and everybody in the audience and everybody who's listening, each one of us make an impact on the planet every single day, and we can choose what sort of impact we want to make. And each of the groups, again, it's grassroots. We don't tell them what to do. And children in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, children in inner city New York, children somewhere in Switzerland, they're going to have different environmental and social problems. So all we say to them is, choose 3 projects, one to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment. And because they get to choose, you find every child is passionate about what they do. So they talk about it, they plan. Of course, the little ones need help, obviously. And then, but when you get to high school, even middle school too, high school, university, roll up their sleeves, they get up. And I'm telling you, as we talk now, around the world, there are roots and shoots groups who are making a difference. And they're passionate. Like that little Swedish girl who went to the climate summit in Poland, and you know what she said, we're not...
We had her on the program, actually.
Yes, I'm sure you did.
She's amazing.
But I find that everywhere. I think young people, I don't know, I may be wrong, but it seems to me there's a new power in them. And certainly, if we listen to them and we empower them to take action, they are the force that is my main reason for hope, is the young people.
Before I open it up, I have to ask one final question. What is this prop doing between you and me?
Okay, well, I have to back up a little bit and say, people always ask me why I still have hope. I've got 5 reasons. I've told you one, the young people. Second, the resilience of nature. I talked about the trees coming back around Gombe, animals on the brink of extinction having another chance, forests being saved and regenerating. Social media, for the first time ever, we can bring people together from around the world who care about an issue so they can strengthen each other, strengthen numbers, and also the human brain. I mean, we're coming up with solutions faster and faster. And it's important that we realize, use our brain to leave our own light ecological footprint every single day. That's important. But then finally, there's the indomitable human spirit. And I carry, he's called Mr. H. He was given to me 28 years ago by a man called Gary Horn. Gary Horn was blinded age 21 in the US Marines. He decided to become a magician. Everybody said, Gary, how can you be a magician if you're blind? He said, well, I can try. He does shows for kids. They don't know he's blind. At the end, he'll say, something might go wrong in your life. You never know, but if it does, don't give up. There's always a way forward. He does scuba diving. He does skydiving. He's taught himself to paint. Blind, never painted before. Anyway, he thought he was giving me a stuffed chimpanzee for my birthday, and I made him hold the tail. Chimps don't have tails, Gary. And he said, never mind, take him where you go, and you know my spirit's with you. So he is my symbol for the indomitable human spirit, the people that you hear about, the people I meet, who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up. And, you know, there are icons, Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 17 years of hard physical labor and had the amazing ability to forgive, so that with de Klerk he could, you know, end the evil regime of apartheid. But all around us, there are people tackling personal or environmental or whatever, big ones or small ones, and either succeeding or inspiring other people to join them in the battle. And I think the most important thing, every single one of us, that's every single one of this audience, every single person who's listening, we all have that indomitable spirit. But we don't always recognize it, we don't always feed it, we don't always grow it, we don't always let it out into the world to do good, to inspire, to take action.
Okay, one final thought on indomitable human spirit.
And the inspiration rubs off, so you better hold him.
I will hold him. You also have, I don't know whether it's spirit, whether it's mind, whether it's temperament, or whether it's a genetics, but you're 84 years old, you travel 300 days a year. What's the secret of not getting jet lag?
It doesn't exist. I go by the sun. The sun rises, it's morning. The sun sets, it's night.
There you have it, the indomitable human spirit. So, we have time for a few questions. So if somebody has a question, if you can just raise your hand and ask it loud and clear. Yep, please. We have mics, and so if you can just wait.
First of all, I want to thank you for such a moving and inspirational talk. And I wanted to ask, being one of the first women in your field, how was it working, and did you face any discrimination, and how did you overcome that? As a young woman myself, in our world today, I was wondering.
Can you hear?
As a young woman, when you were working, did you face discrimination? How did you overcome it? What are your thoughts about it?
Well, I was very fortunate because, first of all, I had this wonderful mother who never she never talked about women being less important than men, never. I grew up in a household of women. Leakey believed that women made better field observers. He also believed that because I hadn't been to university, it was an advantage, because I hadn't had my mind corrupted by the reductionist scientific thinking of the time. In Africa, it was an advantage to me being a woman, because this was just after independence, and white males were still regarded with a bit of hostility, but I was a white woman. And so the male protection, you know, I'm going to help look after Jane, this crazy young English woman, I'll support her. And I never wanted to be a scientist. So when the first reports came out that the scientists didn't believe me, they didn't believe I'd seen Leakey, I just made it up. I thought, well, I know it's true. Leakey believes me. So why should I care? But I know I was lucky. I was in a kind of privileged position as a woman in a way. And, but the good thing is that it's inspired young women all over the world. My story has inspired them that I did it, so they can do it too.
Other questions? Yep, ma'am. If the second row in the...
Thank you for that wonderful speech. My question to you is, how much responsibility do you think mainstream media bears today for the sustainability crisis that we face?
To what extent is the media responsible for the crisis of sustainability and some of the things you've talked about?
Well, it's true the media has a big role to play in everything. Definitely. And right from the beginning, you know, when the media first came around and wanted to interview me, I tried to hide away. And then I realized that I need the media on my side. And I have found that in all my interactions with the media, I think, hopefully including you tonight, if you approach the media right, they will help you spread a message, and that's very important to me. But there is also this thing, the media must be, it mustn't take sides. So they report both sides, and this, I think, is a mistake. So reporting fake news and reporting real news shouldn't have the same value somehow.
Right.
So the media has a very important role, and hopefully, at least in many countries, they're rising up to fulfill that important role. Sadly, in some countries, they then get killed.
Yeah.
So it's tough in the media. I mean, so many places where people are criticized for not being stronger or tougher. Put yourself in their place and realize that if you're strong and tough, you may be killed. It's difficult.
No, very well put. Somebody at the back, yes, sir. All the way at the back, if you just keep your hand raised so that the mic can get to you.
And talk loudly. When you're nearly 85, something has to go. My eyes work, but...
Yeah, I noticed you don't have hearing aids. Yep.
Well, first I wanted to thank you for making such a good speech. I was very inspired. So we are a class, we're two classes actually, and we made reports about very important people with big influence to this world. And these two friends of mine, they made the report about you, Goodall, and they would be honored to show it to you, and it would mean the world to them if you could sign it for them.
Absolutely.
Sure. Have them bring it on up.
And in return...
You're going to have to climb up those stairs over there.
In
and come up.
return, can you be sure that Roots and Shoots gets going in these classes?
All right, so
Come
the
in
next
front,
class
I can't
assignment
see you.
is,
Hello,
Hello, what's your name?
Moira.
Myra.
My name's Nadine.
Nadine? And these are your reports, and you'd like me to sign
That's
them?
for you.
That's for me. Thank you.
and which one do you
And
want her to sign?
This one.
Just two.
Both of them. So would you like to get involved in Roots and Shoots?
What'd you say?
Maybe you don't speak English, do you?
A little bit.
No. Okay, well, your teacher, you heard. You understand Roots and Shoots, right?
So make sure they start up a Roots and Shoots program. That's the price of the autograph. There's no free lunch here. Though actually there was a free lunch, I suppose.
You can find out about it online.
Okay.
And there is Roots and Shoots in Switzerland.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Wait a minute, you want your name on? One was Nadine,
Yes.
Nadine.
And somebody think up a last question
Yes.
because we have time. So
Okay, and you were
Moira.
M-O,
E with 2 points.
M-R-A.
O-E.
you put the umlauts on later, okay?
You can add it, okay? Add the letter I've missed out. Okay?
All right. I think I saw a hand up there. Yeah, if somebody can get a mic, and if you can just make sure they're brief as they have been, we can get maybe one or two more in.
Why do you think that some people don't pay as much of attention to like these topics as much as other people, such as like global warming and like animal and things that you were talking about?
Well, I think it depends on different factors. So if you have a mother like mine, who was very, found that these things were very important, that's a big help. If you have a school that emphasizes the environmental and the importance of the environment, that's a big help. But some young people don't get taught anything about the environment in school. They don't have parents who care. They get sucked into the commercial world where everything depends on how much money you can get. And one of the real problems faced by the environment is, here's a protected forest. The government is approached by a big corporation who says, we know that there's oil or there's gold or something in this protected area, and we'll support your next election campaign if you will allow us to go and operate in this protected area. And so this happens. So there's a lot of different reasons.
I thought I saw somebody else.
Hello, and thank you for your inspiring words, but at least in my experience, when I try to bring up these issues to adults, they'll be like, oh, that's amazing, and then they won't do anything. So do you have any advice on how to avoid just becoming a talking point and how to actually affect change for political leaders and for business leaders and adults in general?
Well, I missed a bit of that. What was the first part of that?
She said, I find that when I talk about these things, everybody nods approvingly, but basically nothing ever gets done. There's no follow through. So
Yeah.
how do you
Right.
force action rather than have them just treat you as a,
Right.
as, you know?
Well, this is where Roots and Shoots or any other youth organization of that sort is so important, because I found again and again that young people influence their parents. And sometimes these parents are CEOs of a big company. Sometimes they're in government. Sometimes, you know. And so, first of all, young people influence their parents. And secondly, how do you get through to these people? So often I see activists and they come face to face with a CEO or somebody, and they immediately become very aggressive. Do you realize what you're doing to the planet? Do you realize what you're doing to my future? Like this. And so the person that they're attacking is immediately defensive. They're immediately thinking, how can I respond to this? How can I deal with this person? And so I've learned over the years, well, actually I was kind of born that way. I think it was my mother's education, but it's no good when you meet somebody like that who's dedicated to their path, which may be a destructive path. It's no good trying to get to the brain, because their brain is wired for success, for financial success. What you have to do is to get into the heart. And how do you get into the heart? With stories. So you find out just a little bit about the person that you want to change. And then you try and tell stories that will, even if they don't appear to agree with you at the time, I know for a fact they may go away and think about it and think about it. And you may have scored a much bigger point than you thought.
Ma'am, over there, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jane, and also thank you, Fareed, for what you're doing and everything you do. My question is, in regard to social media influencers, some of which have millions and millions of followers and influence people to go out and buy things, do you think that they're obligated to influence people to go out and talk with their congresspeople, plant a tree, actually physically do something?
Yes, I do. I do think, it's like I said, every single one of us makes a difference every day. And we can make differences in different ways depending on who we are. And so writing letters to congressmen and senators can be very, very important. Planting trees can be very important. Giving talks, going and talking with refugees, for example. I mean, there's ways in which we can all make a difference, and we should feel obligated to do what we can every day.
So, yeah. Are you the first man to ask a question here? I think so.
So thank you for this very inspiring talk. I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure you faced a lot of adversity, how did you deal with that, and what kept you going, like, through these rough phases of your life?
Well, I suppose, first of all, I'm a very obstinate person. I'm also very good at living in the moment. I don't know how I got so good at it. So, okay, it's a big problem. I can't immediately do anything about it, but Maybe it's threatening a program or something. So what can I be doing? And try to do what I can do so that at the end of the day I think, well, there's nothing more I could have done about that problem today, but keep it in the back of your mind. I get strength. I said in the rainforest, I feel this great spiritual power. And I actually feel that great spiritual power all around. Whether we do or whether we don't is not important. But for me, the fact that I believe in this spiritual power is important. I think I get strength. I'm pretty sure I do. And that's a help too. But it's basically because I'm obstinate. I mean, if I come up against somebody who I think, you know, your values stink, and you're in a powerful position, and you think that you can just destroy the environment, and you think that you can stop the program I'm doing, well, I'm going to prove that you're wrong. And I may not be able to directly fight you, but I can work my way around underneath. I can instill the right values of compassion, love, respect in the young people, and they will gradually grow up and move into those positions. So I'm sustained in adversity, and also, I have to say, by the friends around me. It used to be my dog, but traveling 300 days a year, unfortunately, I can't have a dog anymore, which is very sad. But I have wonderful friends everywhere I go, and they're a terrific support. And I've got my family. And as I say, I'm just plain obstinate. And a bit like those Russian dolls. You hit them over, and they rise up again.
On that note, Jane Goodall, such an honor.